Okay, hey guys, my name is Stani Kulechov and I'm the founder of ETHLend. So as Richard presented, basically we're a decentralized application built on top of the Ethereum blockchain network. Kind of interesting thing because for the last 5 years, Bitcoin has been basically a protocol, peer-to-peer protocol to establish trustless transactions, right? But there's also a lot of things that comes into the Bitcoin itself and cryptocurrencies and blockchain technology. And the aspect that we're looking upon is basically the asset class aspect, because for the last 5 years there has been a lot of interest in the cryptocurrency sector. There's more and more newcomers to the field, more people that are interested in Bitcoin, more people that are interested in for example, tokens, and also the institutional side, which is basically gaining more momentum. Now, just a couple of questions. How many of you guys are actually holding Bitcoin? Is this something that you can admit to? Okay, pretty much, yeah. What about, for example, tokens? Do you guys do those as well? Oh, it's pretty savvy crowd here. Okay, that's amazing. So basically, how many guys of you had a situation where you actually wanted to, you needed cash, you wanted to actually sell your Bitcoin or any kind of digital asset, but didn't want to do that? Okay, yeah, I know the feeling. Not very good one. No one likes to get rid of the exposure. So what we are going to today discuss is basically, digital asset-backed lending. So since the Bitcoin is and our other cryptocurrencies are getting more traction, basically there's a new market out there, which is completely a bit different that we used to have, for example, compared to shares, equity, communities, and so forth. So, so as we all know, the kind of rationale behind of Bitcoin, but for example, digital assets as such, they can be, for example, cryptocurrencies, just representations of some sort of right, for example, right to ownership, right to possession, or some sort of representation of real life. For example, communities. For example, once we started at ETHLend to develop the application back in 2016, there was a project called DigixDAO, which actually tokenized gold. So basically they have a gold vault that is audited, and basically each token represents 1 gram of gold. And this kind of project has been emerging more since that. Or basically a digital asset can be a utility in a token, which is mostly the case in terms of ICOs, for example. Now, interesting part as an asset class, Bitcoin, cryptocurrencies, digital assets, they're novelty asset class. We actually do not know much about this asset class. There has been many years that these assets has been traded. For example, Bitcoin, we all know Mt. Gox, for example. Story not good, but for example, there's a lot of liquidity, for example, in Bitcoin, Ethereum, and all the top currencies out there. Now, the interesting part is, of course, that this particular asset class has developed over the years and become kind of something that's pretty interesting in terms of investment and other use cases where lending, for example, comes, and where ETHLend, for example, comes. And there's more, I mean, last year, 2017, everything was all about decentralization, and 2016, decentralization, decentralized applications, And that's basically where from ETHLend is coming from. Our idea was to create basically a digital asset-based lending software which is completely decentralized, that we cannot go into these transactions and say to the lender and borrower that, hey, we don't like what you guys are doing, we want to stop this thing, or say that this particular interest rate is what market should adopt to. And that was kind of our approach when we found basically Ethereum and digital assets and all the tokens. Now, I think we're still there, but what we are seeing more, especially during this year, is the kind of institutional side. There's a lot of institutionals coming into the field and basically kind of want to make those exposures in this asset class. And kind of that's the one part. I mean, we have decentralization here, decentralized applications, trustless system, and then we have something in between. For example, OTC deals from fiat currencies to cryptocurrencies, and something that's basically off-chain. So it's pretty interesting. And for example, Goldman Sachs launched their trading desk, which is pretty interesting because it's not actually a cryptocurrency trading desk, but a derivative desk upon the cryptocurrency value. But it's a way for institutionals to come. And I remember being a couple of weeks ago in Paris in a banking event, basically which was consisted of retail banks and also private banks. Now, it was kind of evident that whenever we were talking about cryptocurrencies and this event, first of all, we were the only blockchain startup in this particular event, so we were already kind of the odd guy there, right? And basically, when we started to discuss about cryptocurrencies, one interesting thing we noticed amongst the retail bankers, so the audience was more or less banking professionals, middle management from the banks, and so forth. Once we mentioned something about Bitcoin or cryptocurrencies, most of the audience kind of like went a bit like, yikes, we're not touching that, cryptocurrencies are volatile, why do you need Bitcoin when you have, for example, you have banks that you can trust? I mean, we heard like comments that every day they hear that Bitcoin gets stolen, for example, and one of the interesting comments I heard that from a banker was basically that, yeah, I don't like Bitcoin, I like Ripple because it's stable. So it's kind of an interesting part because I think in that space, in the retail banking space, banks might not be, it's not just about being ready or I think it's also about information. I mean, where do these entities and these professionals are getting the education and the learning, and that's something which is very important in Bitcoin communities. On the other hand, in the same event, we have had, for example, private bankers, for example, from Switzerland, Liechtenstein, and actually they were more interested in new business models and fulfilling the request on cryptocurrencies that are coming up from their clients. So there's a couple of different spaces, and I think it usually starts with institutionals, investment bankers like Goldman Sachs and private banks, and moves slightly to the retail section once that is ready. So that's very interesting discussion that has been during this year. Now, as an asset class, digital assets are pretty interesting because there's over 1,600 various assets, over 15,000 different markets, and I think the interesting part is that actually these kind of assets are liquid 24/7. So especially the most liquid ones, Bitcoin, for example, Ethereum. So it's kind of different asset class from securities, right? For example, you might have a Facebook share, and let's say it's Friday night, Friday evening. There's huge data breach at Facebook, and they give the press release by the end when the stock market closes. People are dumping over the weekend, basically thinking, okay, once the market opens or the OCT deals, and on Monday, basically, the stock price drops, for example. It kind of limits where you can use this kind of asset, and especially when it comes to the lending facility that we are doing at ETHLend, being a liquid asset, which is all the time liquid every day, it's pretty interesting, and we will go to that part. But in overall, yeah. 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 All right. In overall, what is basically digital asset-backed lending? It basically means that if you own any kind of asset, let's say in terms of digital asset, it can be, for example, Bitcoin. Basically, you might have a situation where you actually want to hold that Bitcoin because you want to have some exposure, you believe in that Bitcoin evaluation, for example, or it might be some startup project that has launched their own token, and you actually want to hold that particular asset because you believe in that project, you believe in the project success, or you believe in the utility of the token, that you want to use the platform in the future when the software is ready, right? And at some points, there might be situations where you actually are in a situation you might want to need or have to liquidate your position. Let's say there is there is some basically car repair bill you have to pay, or you have to buy a car, or any kind of purchase in your real life, for example, or maybe you just want more liquidity to do other investments, for example, in the meanwhile. And what we are actually doing, we're using these digital assets, such as, for example, Bitcoin, such as, for example, Ethereum and ERC20 tokens, and holding these as an escrow for the loan and granting the loan for the user. And the kind of model that we're doing is not a new one. I mean, previously, for example, there's a concept called Lombard loans where you actually have securities. For example, you might have those Facebook shares or Apple shares, and basically you don't want to sell, but you want to get a low-cost loan, for example, and use that liquidity, for example, to other purchases or investments. What we are actually doing is something interesting. First of all, in ideological level, we're taking this model, which is used to be more or less kind of an option for the rich guy. I mean, this in 2018, the hardest product in lending space in Wall Street was actually the very same model where you have these Apple, Facebook shares, and you pledge them to get some liquidity. But these kind of things are available for the high net worths, for example, institutionals. So we're taking basically the same product for cryptocurrency users, which basic kind of profile is more diverse. We have millennials, we have institutionals coming, so it's more diverse in that sense. And the technically interesting part is that we're putting everything on a blockchain. So we're using smart contracts to actually store the collateral and handle all the transactions. So actually, we're removing the kind of need to the lender and the borrower to actually trust a third party. And the idea with the smart contracts actually is that you don't need to trust third parties because you have a piece of code that is pre-programmed and deployed onto the blockchain ledger. And that piece of code is copied from a node to node. And what happens is it's pretty difficult to actually change that particular code. And then there's a consensus mechanism to validate these blocks and the transactions. So we kind of provide a completely new product in a decentralized economy. And besides that, we're actually using the technology that we're having these assets. And it's currently...
So you borrow fiat currency, or you borrow cryptocurrency?
Well, what ETHLend does, you're borrowing cryptocurrency. You're pledging one digital asset to get another one, or you're pledging digital asset to get, for example, a cryptocurrency which is pegged to USD currency or any fiat currency. That's completely decentralized, for example. There you don't need banking system, banks, for example. But there's other market participants. For example, there's Lending and basically BlockFi from US. And these guys are granting cash loans against cryptocurrency. And there you need a kind of banking infrastructure or some kind of trust. So not completely something that can be evaded, but the way ETHLend does it completely crypto to crypto enables us to actually have this thing completely on smart contracts. And I think in the most efficient sense is pretty beautiful, but we do have kind of limits as well. I mean, for example, 6 months ago, there was a situation where there was crypto collectibles game on the market called CryptoKitties, and basically we had certain limitations in transactions. So we can say that so our protocol ETHLend is basically proof of concept, but so is the whole blockchain environment. So is Ethereum, for example. So is Bitcoin. And it's interesting to see where it actually goes. But the underlying point of our model is more or less that the digital asset as a collateral, we do have, let's say, volatile market, right? But you can control that volatility by actually refilling that collateral from the borrower's side, or you can initiate margin call if the borrower hasn't refilled the collateral, which basically means that you can liquidate the collateral, for example, in case of default or if the market price goes down and there is no collateral refilling in place. So it actually creates a way for the lender to have low risk investment, and the borrower side also low cost, basically low interest loan. If the collateral is managed well. And yeah, well, why use blockchain? Basically, for us, for ETHLend, what means blockchain is to remove the third parties to basically make an environment where participant doesn't have to trust each other. And for us, it also means that it's a good settlement network, because we don't have to use banking infrastructure for settling transactions. And here's some statistics. So this is a couple of months old, well, month and a half. We have initiated over 3,000 loan transactions already from the beginning of the year. We accept over 250 various digital assets at the moment. And the current volume is around, I think, well, there's 15,000 Ethereum, but I think it's more or less closing up to 20,000 Ethereum lending volume. So it's pretty good in terms of decentralized application. Bitcoin lending is something that's coming up within a month, and also Bitcoin as a collateral. So basically, we're doing some cross-chain operations here as well. So that's a pretty cool effort that we have done during this year. And I think once the Ethereum network is more right, we will see some interesting adoption as well. It's actually not easy to point. Yeah. So we do constantly research on the different kinds of digital assets and the behavior, and we're part of Ethereum, Enterprise Ethereum Alliance, and also Multi-Chain Asset Managers Association. And the topic is still pretty novelty. I mean, in basically cryptocurrencies and digital assets as a loan collateral and kind of that kind of perspective for the assets. Yeah. If there is any kind of question or the topic is interesting for you guys, here's my email. You can write me and discuss more, or you can just grab me here whenever we have the time for the beers. Thank you, guys.